Thank you very much. It is an honour to come and talk to you. I've obviously known about the IEEE and many of the organisations associated with it for many, many years, but have come from a different path. So I've only just recently started to engage with some of the engineering organisations that I've always dealt with through BBC R&D in the past, but now feel slightly overawed by the combined knowledge in this hall. And when I was asked to do this by John, I spoke to Graham Thomas, who will be speaking later on, and John Zabrowski, who will also be speaking later on, about how I should approach it. And they said, just talk about production. Now that's a subject very close to my heart, something that I've been doing for the last 30 years. In fact, I was an editor for 15 years for the BBC. And I'm going to give you an overview of 3D as I would see it from the production point of view. So it might be slightly left field to some of you, but actually it puts it into context, because no matter what happens in a laboratory, no matter what happens in an enclosed and protected environment, at some point somebody is going to give it to a producer. And I can tell you, if you want to make sure something is indestructible, just give it to any producer. I give them 10 minutes to tell you if it's indestructible or not. We have had devices that have been tested by both the American and Israeli armies as being tank-proof, that have come back after a day in the field completely and utterly destroyed. So from that point of view, I always like to start with the fact my job role is head of technology for BBC HD and 3D, because I'm not head of technology for the BBC as a whole. But I've recently discovered I'm head of technology for anything that has a D in it. So that includes ultra high definition television, 3D popped along. Anything you can think of with a D is now my responsibility. But I also assume, I think it's that not everybody knows what the BBC is and what it's been doing. I always start with the fact that you can't assume, even though we're allegedly well known around the world, that everybody knows what we really do and what we've been up to. There is a hall of fame in BBC R&D where you walk down the corridor and there is a row of Queen's Awards for technology and industry. And I always like to say that actually, although we're very well known for programme making, we're also extremely well known within academia and within many organisations for the technology that has been developed through some of our research and some of our collaborations where you put producers and research engineers together. And just as a starter, and I'm hoping this is going to work, I've got a small promo that's been made by Future Leader in Technology with BBC R&D.
Good morning from BBC Two, Europe's first TV channel to broadcast in colour. And now, for the first time, welcome to BBC Two HD.
This is the British Broadcasting Company calling.
The station goes on the air. Television broadcast for the first time. The first outside broadcast of the Olympic Games.
Coronation service opens 5 minutes.
The first current television program in Europe. You can keep abreast of the latest news with CFAX, meaning CFAX.
Computers are getting to be very, very complex.
BBC Computers in Schools.
To stay above the world's ever
Today you'll find it on Star Wars.
Making the unmissable.
We're giving you complete control of what you want to watch and when you want to watch it. We've been bringing you the future since 1922. Makes you wonder, where next?
So that's a collaboration between what I will call pure engineering and pure production, and it's very interesting to see how exactly the two have worked together to produce some of the things we now take for granted throughout the television industry. So just again, just say what we've been up to and what we've been doing. Every decade, effectively, we've had something to say within the industry. Right the way through from 405 line television, where you see the first high definition service in 1936, still that boom plaque which we put on buildings where something interesting or famous has happened, through to the noughties, where we were responsible for the development of DVB-T2, which enabled the UK's and many others terrestrial HD transmissions. And I wait to see what this decade will bring, but I'm hoping people like Graham and John, who will be talking later, might give you some hints about what could be happening over the next 10 years. So I want to talk about 3D as a technology. And one of my bosses once said, people will get fed up with technology one day because there are bucket loads of technology just waiting for the most inappropriate time to launch. And I think if you look back over the history, we have just got ourselves, our fingernails onto the ledge of the technology we're currently happy with when something else comes along to completely disrupt that. And it's one of my jobs to actually try and moderate the excitement of engineering with the practicalities of production and the expectation of an audience that will one day say, why is the BBC wasting my license fee money on a subject or a technology that I cannot see? And on the day we launch it, we'll say, why aren't all my programs in this technology? Because I pay my license fee. So we stuck between those two very, very narrow divides. So what I want to talk today is 3D, why now? Why particularly now? It's been around for a long time. The trial, how do we get to where we are now and our progress towards the Olympics, what the building blocks were to get us from never having transmitted a 3D program, which is not quite true, never having transmitted a 3D program to putting something probably was the showcase of the world to air. On the day, which is what we did, very little on the day, only lasted 2 weeks. Post-mortem, what we gained from it, and finally what we're going to do next. So to start with, 3D, why now? Just why now? For those of you who know a lot more about 3D than I do, you know it's been around for a long, long time. Every innovation in 2D, from stills photography through to movies, through to television, through to holography is 3D, but through to the next generation, has always been followed very, very quickly by the 3D version. So photography was followed very, very shortly by 3D photography. Cinema, very, very shortly by 3D films. First one we know of transmitted was Los Angeles 1922. And I would say that was the first fully produced one. There may have been many before that that were just experimentations and trials. Patents for half-silvered mirror, the beam splitters, mirror rigs we see now is 1953, and that is a beam splitter. It's big, 35mm, two 35mm cameras on it. It's probably a bit heavy. I'd like to see someone try and walk around with it, especially on the shoulder. It's difficult to align, actually you need a large spanner. And physically synchronised. Well, actually, that's the good bit about it, because a toothed rubber band kept them synchronised, which is probably slightly more reliable, because you can see when it had broken than the current system of synchronising two devices. But what's actually different? Here's a mirror rig. It's big. It's heavy. Again, you try walking around with that. You can, but you need to be a pretty big guy. It's okay, slightly developed since the spanner. It's computer aligned now, but some people say the spanner might have been more reliable. And it's electronically synchronized. And actually, again, the toothed rubber band might have been more reliable because, as I said, you could tell when it broke. And again, disruptive technology idea, 3D as a disruptive technology. It doubles the infrastructure. You need two of everything. Its TV production is not fully HD yet. I mean, if you look at the key areas of lead in program making, a lot of broadcasters are HD, but they're working in an infrastructure that is basically SD still. So BBC is now virtually completely HD, but we still have a lot of infrastructure around with our communications, our third-party suppliers, where we're chewing up bandwidth as they're expecting us to expand the definition through it. And then we say, can we double it please to put 3D through it? And they just look at us if we're completely insane. We're trying to do 3D productions, 2D productions simultaneously. We have a huge audience base that's going to want to watch this in 2D. And there's no guidance. If you look at it, we have absolutely no guidance for production exchange when we started this. We would say to Discovery, who are one of our co-producers on many programs, what would you like? And they'd look and think, well, let's have 2 tapes. And then we'd send them 2 tapes and they said, well, actually, we can't do anything with them. Can we have 1? We made it up as we went along. And actually, we all know, I don't think anybody's immune to this, program budgets, like every other budget, is shrinking. And suddenly we say, can you just double the number of cameras? And can you just double the infrastructure to connect them together? So, what have we been doing? Why? Why 3D now? It's, and I'm not going to swear, but it's those people who want to sell televisions. This is unlike any other iteration of 3D. It's fed by a very successful, and we have to say some of the titles to begin with weren't successful, but it's fed by a very successful movie industry now. If you look at the most successful films, they're primarily CG. That didn't exist in the 80s, the 50s, the 30s, when the other iterations of 3D arrived. It is possible to make extremely good 3D using a lot of computer-generated backgrounds because you can move the horizon to make it look right. You don't have to shoot it correctly, you can do it afterwards, which means you can spend months making it look right. It's led by consumer display technologies. They were running out of steam selling panels in HD to the key markets, the Far East, America, Western Europe, and they were beginning to move into, well, the bucket, Eastern Europe, Africa and other areas where they weren't making the huge profits they made from the first early adopters. It was part of a package, and that was the other interesting thing. I can't think of a single 3D TV that isn't also connected TV. They all contain some form of connection now which allows alternate services, so people were very interested in buying them, not just for 3D. And as I said, the sales of HD televisions were beginning to decline in the big markets, and this was a very, very big worry to some of the panel manufacturers. We had huge factories who could turn around a panel in minutes, but it was very easy to turn those processes around to generate 3D displays or 3D panels, especially as we've gone for the easy option of the two versions of active and passive, but based on stereo 3D. And there was virtually no price increase. So when you're in a shop looking at it, probably $50, €50, £50, it was always about 50, no matter which currency you worked in. Difference between the HD and the 3D version. And finally, especially for in the UK and Western Europe, it would arrive just at the right time to target digital switchover, when people were thinking about changing the main TV in the house, therefore were not really worried about spending a few extra pounds, dollars or euros on a TV that gave them 3D, because they were going to buy one anyway, and they were in the supermarkets, and in the bucket shops buying them. So the BBC's trial, we decided to do a 2-year trial of 3D. For those of you who know the UK market, BSkyB, the private subscription broadcaster, had announced a 3D service, a 3D channel. A lot of pressure on us, therefore, to respond in some way with free-to-air 3D, and a lot of pressure on us to do it, of course, for no additional cost. We give it away free. And a lot of pressure to be there with the event-driven programs. So we couldn't actually hide away and do something very simple. We had to do something big. So we decided that a trial was the best way of approaching it. We have to approach the BBC Trust if we want to do anything with a licence fee that is not within our current remit. We don't launch services unless we have good public head of steam behind us. So therefore, trials are quite common if they're targeted at an audience-facing technology. So what do we want to do? We wanted to experiment with a different genre. We didn't want to hit just one genre and say, let's do sport, let's do movies. Well, movies would be quite easy. We buy them off the shelf, we just transmit them. makes a good movie channel, but actually doesn't teach you anything about 3D. And it also doesn't give the audience an idea of what 3D really does, because they've probably seen that in 3D in the cinema anyway, and television is always going to be a slightly poorer relation to that experience. We wanted to try different technologies. We wanted to be able to put some of the new technologies that were just beginning to hit the market at that time into operation on a trial basis where we could afford to make a few mistakes and apologise for them. We wanted to every single one of our 3D programs had a blog written by myself and by the commissioner who was responsible for 3D. Kim Schillinglaw and before that Daniel Nagler were both responsible for commissioning the programs. We did a blog that said, this is what's coming, this is what we've done, this is how we did it, tell us what you think. We also did audience feedback, our pulse feedback, which I've got some figures from later on in the presentation, that gave us the reaction and figures from what people thought. We wanted also to trial 2D, 3D production techniques. Could we make a program? And we've done one program this way, where it was just made. 3D, 2D, both at the same time, the 2D version being extracted from the 3D. And we wanted to expand the strategies into the BBC long-term position on 3D. In other words, we wanted to extrapolate the information we've got to say, is it a channel? Is it a service? Is it an event-driven technology? Do we put it on the main services, as in terrestrial, all platforms, satellite and cable? Do we put it on iPlayer only? Do we make it an alternate content? And finally, we wanted to take part in discussions about standards. I don't think that you can sit in a meeting in the EBU, the ITU, or even in this body and say, we have an opinion about it if you haven't got some experience of it. And that's what we wanted to bring, that experience back to the people that we were talking about the standards. And finally, we delivered some interim guides to productions that we published, and Sky published theirs too, so you can have a look at those and see what you think and comment on them. Trial programs, over the first year and a half, we knew the Olympics were coming up. We didn't know there would be 3D in them at that point. We did the Six Nations Rugby trial in cinemas only. Wimbledon, we're about to approach the third year of Wimbledon 3D. Children in Need, which is our big telethon show, we did an special insert with the Strictly Come Dancing or Dancing with the Stars special that was inside that. We did the Strictly Come Dancing final live in 3D. It was completely insane. Not only wasn't it in Television Centre where we were completely controlled, we did it in at an OB, we did it in 3D and we did it live. We're mad. Planet Dinosaur was an offshoot from the successful Dinosaur series. We made a one-off special in 3D against CG, demonstrated how well 3D could look. We also put that one, was the first one we put onto iPlayer, as well as transmitted. Olympics 2012, which we're talking about, we've done the last night of the proms, a big music session. Mr. Stink was a children's Christmas drama, and this is the one we made 2D, 3D simultaneously. And then, of course, the Queen's Speech. That was shot by Sky, but both Sky and ourselves transmitted that in 3D at the end of last year. One other programme. Who's Doctor Who? Yeah, hands up, Doctor Who fans. Marvellous, yeah. It's like Marmite, isn't it? You either love it or hate it. Hands up, people who hate Doctor Who then. Oh, good. Everybody's ambivalent. It's the 50th anniversary. Actually, it should really be the 60th anniversary, but one of our controllers decided to cancel it for a good 10 years. But it's the 50th anniversary of the series. It's a major multi-doctor event. In other words, we're even reincarnating some of the dead doctors, literally dead doctors. And it's going to be part of a package of events in November this year. But it actually isn't the first 3D Doctor Who. On the 30th anniversary, it's part of Children in Need, where we tend to make odd programmes. We did another version of it. It was 5 doctors at that point. I think we only had 5 then, so it shows you how long ago it was. It was a charity special, and it used the Pulse effect. In other words, you could see it on a normal TV. You just had to go and buy, which is the charity link on it. We did a link with some supermarkets where you bought special Doctor Who Children in Need glasses for £1, which all the money was donated to the charity. And for those of you who have never seen it, I'm going to apologise in advance for the script and for some of the acting, and it's based in the EastEnders set as well, because it was a combination of Doctor Who meets EastEnders, for those of you who know about the soaps. And I had the dubious pleasure of editing it as well back in about 20 years ago.
Mayday! Mayday! This is an urgent message for all of the doctors. It's vitally important that you listen carefully to me. For once, our whole existence is being threatened by a renegade Time Lord known only as the Rani. She hates me.
A Cyberman and a Time Lord from Gallifrey. Just one more specimen needed. Fantastic. The menagerie is almost complete.
Time is literally of the essence. The Doctor's remaining incarnations are teetering on the edge of a precipice.
You're obsessed. Don't forget what we've come here for.
Earthlings pose no threat to my technology, imbecile. It's the Doctor I want out of the way.
Interception in 5 seconds, right?
Although I will miss the challenge.
3, 2, 1.
Activate!
Beating time at the zoo?
And the companions went in 2 by 2.
Isn't no art, Doctor.
Maybe it is. But I say run.
Say goodbye, Doctors. You're all going on a long journey. A very long journey.
That was a quick edit down to the 10-minute two-parter. Yes, it went downhill from there onwards, but actually it was quite fun. A lot of moving of camera, as those who know how the portrait effect works, a lot of moving of camera to the left or right, and in fact everybody felt quite ill after editing it. We discovered at that point that, of course, non-linear editors back 20 years ago couldn't edit 3D because they chopped a field out, and the portrait effect works on interlace very well and very poorly at 25 frames a second, unless you shoot it for that. So we all sat there watching it in 2D, hoping the 3D would look all right, which we didn't see until we transmitted it. What else has BBC up to? Well, BBC Films, everybody forgets we have a film, it's not a programme making area, it's a commissioning and funding area. BBC Films, part of the lottery funded area of filmmaking in the UK, made 2 films, Street Dance and Street Dance 2. Street Dance 1 effectively was versioned into 3D. Street Dance 2 was shot in 3D. And iPlayer. iPlayer has been very successful at being an alternate method of delivering 3D, especially to all these 3D televisions that have iPlayer apps built into them because they're connected. And that's the connection. Every 3D television is connected and everyone has an iPlayer app, so therefore we can deliver over-the-top 3D without damaging current transmission requirements or channel allocations. It was successfully approved in December 2011. We were able to sustainable 3D to it, in other words, we could do this continuously. It didn't cost us any more to transmit the program in 3D if the 3D version was via iPlayer. We could get it there without consumer resistance. They didn't have to change anything, just had to buy 3D television, nothing else. And that was, as the sales were rising, that was a given. We did Strictly Come Dancing at 1280 by 720 top bottom, but Dinosaurs, by then we've managed to get 1920 1080, so we went to side by side, and there was 25 frames a second progressive. We were doing 50 frames progressive for Strictly. So we have 2 technologies that seem to work quite well to deliver this over the top. Right, getting to the important bits, we still haven't got to the Olympics yet. So the building blocks, how do we get, once we knew the 3D was going to happen at the Olympics, how do we get from, well, we can do it sort of, to we're now going to do it live, we're going to do it every day on the biggest event that the UK has ever had. An opportunity in Wimbledon to try some of the things out. This is Wimbledon 2011 and 2012. We started the 11 with working with Sony. who have signed a contract with the Wimbledon club to do some new technology there, and this is one of the things they wanted to do. So we had to decide, could we move the signals properly? What was the impact of compression, both for contribution links and for distribution? Could we get 3D through a 2D playout chain, because we weren't going to rebuild our entire playout chain for about 6-7 hours of transmission, no matter how big the program was. What was the impact of side-by-side processing? We knew we would have to pre-process to get the signals out there. What would the audience reaction be to having to manually switch their televisions because the DVB signalling wasn't working, and we didn't know that it would be working. Had we missed anything? Because when you start doing this, you suddenly find you had a hole, something doesn't work, something breaks, and we've got a live program to get out. So let's run through the OB facilities. For those of you who know about outside broadcasts, they are large, complex operations. We had a truck supplied by the Visions company. BBC doesn't have an OB company anymore. We used CIS, which is the old BBC OBs, plus the market now. We had a main and reserve feed in side-by-side coming out in 1080i, 25 frames a second. That will be our main feed. We had a submix generated where we took the sound effects, effectively the background from BBC transmission, and the foreground, the commentary was put on separately because we had a completely different camera setup and a completely different cutting ratio. We had a cinema outlet as well. Sony were very keen to get this into their new projectors, so they wanted to do a cinema dynamic range mix. We had to do a television dynamics range mix from the same truck. We had to think about how the commentary was going to be done, because it was also, remember this was in surround sound as well, how we were going to get Dolby E-Sync in sync through the transmission chain with a 3D image, and how we were going to get the main and reserves through to, again, thinking about what happens if things go wrong, what happens when the whole thing collapses. We have an audience in cinemas, some of whom have paid, and those at home who are watching 3D, and the Wimbledon final isn't going out, they're not very happy with us. The contribution link, we decided on MPEG 2 at that point. We weren't happy that H.264 was going to be reliable enough, again 2 years ago, with new encoders, new and decoders. We also didn't know what the bit rate would have to be to maintain a good separation of images if we were sending them side by side. So we had an 85 to 100 megabit link. We had 85 on the semis and 100 for the finals back to television centre, main and reserve. That bit not diverse. We are very, very worried about people putting diggers through cables. So we usually send things by multiple paths. This time we took a risk and we assumed that BBC One 2D was going that way, BBC One 3D was going that way. If all went horribly wrong, we just put the 2D to air and apologise. That is the beginning. That's the trucks arriving. That is just the 3D vision. There, you can see the guys in the middle. That is the equipment that was deployed throughout the centre court only. Remember, we were just doing one court. That's what the camera rigs look like, and there's a 2D and 3D camera next to each other in one of the camera bunkers. Routing. It's fairly straightforward routing. MPEG 2 via BT Tower back to television centre on dual fibres. No diversity, so they both came down the same fibre trunking. HDSDI from television centre to Redby, one via the main 1.5 gig link. This was in side-by-side mode at the time, and one via Dirac. For those of you who know, Dirac is a compression system developed by the BBC to allow us to feed HD images through SDI infrastructure. Why did we use that? We had run out. We had run out of circuits by that point because we had BBC One, BBC Two, and BBC HD all running Wimbledon during that weekend. So we put our reserves onto Dirac lines. Resilience, well, we had to think about what we were going to do in the Visions truck. We had side-by-side feeds with embedded audio. We had the left and right feeds going to converters, those Sonic converters, and a converter that we had selected. We had a fail-safe, in other words, what happens if a mixer breaks? We had a fail-safe to a single camera. We have vision mixers failing to one camera, so that we can maintain an output while we panic. And we had standard redundancy power supplies all over the place, so that we could assume and get the power back to a truck very, very quickly. Within our playout provider, which is totally 2D, we had to put in, if you like, a path. That path would be fixed. It would have standard facilities for a live program, but they wouldn't be able to touch it. In other words, once they hit it to air, it would stay that way. They couldn't do any of their usual adding captions. We had to have special breakdown captions made in side-by-side mode. We had to have put your glasses on now and take your glasses off now, switch your telly to 3D mode and switch your telly to 2D mode options. We had a caption made that you could read in both modes. So no matter whether you had your glasses on or off, you didn't fall over. For those of you who've seen a 2D image on a 3D screen in 3D mode, you know it's very painful until you could find the button to turn it off. And that was it. That was our routing. This is important. Why is this? Am I talking about this for the Olympics? Because this was a trial. We had to make sure this would work. The blue bits are all the cinema distributions, the international distributions. The other bits are what we had to do to add 3D to our current 2D infrastructure. The one to look at, the really ones to look at here are these two, side-by-side conversion. So side-by-side conversion is really, really critical. Why? Because alias is the enemy of quality. Everybody knows the more alias in the signal, the more detail in the signal is going to be encoded that is not visible. That's going to chew up bit rate, that's going to destroy the image. And for those of you who know about side-by-side imaging, usually on H.264 encoders, the image gets softer before it starts to break up or block effectively. If that image gets softer, the image is spread across more pixels, and it's in the left and right eye. Those pixels effectively get broader, they get closer together, the 2D disappears, the 3D disappears first. It becomes painful and then vanishes. So you have to be really careful with compression, because the impact is not just poor pictures, but still 3D. The impact is gradually losing your 3D through your eyes beginning to twist left and right independently, which is not very nice, and then finally it just dies, it disappears, and then the picture breaks up or blocks. So we've used a processor that actually is a derivative of Dirac, made by the same company. It's a stereo brain for those who've heard of it, but it gave us probably one of the best alias-free guys that built it understood filtering, and filtering is the key to getting everything right. Too much of it, and of course, it's too soft. Too little, you get aliasing. So it's a balance of getting it exactly right. We wanted to know what the impact on resolution was, the impact on motion, how, I'm saying aliasing, how it affected our emission encoders, and the ease of leaving it unattended. We can't dive into these things during a live program and make any adjustments. They have to work. This is new technology. Everything in 3D is usually just 2 times what we're used to. At some point you're into new technology, and from that point onwards, we have no reliability. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how we're going to assess the degradation of a signal based on, say, heat, for example. Actually, this thing ended up with a guy putting his coffee cap on it and keeping his coffee warm for the entire final of Wimbledon. Now, it was hot on the final of Wimbledon, very unusually, but actually that kept his coffee too hot to drink. So we had to have a rethink about what we were going to use for the Olympics, because unlike running for 4 hours, this was going to have to run for 2 weeks. Side-by-side processing, as I said again, very important. Again, this is just an example of what happens. That's what we get, and that's what we're looking for. It actually does, you can see the resolution. You can't see it on this one because it's screen's not resolution. So that's the famous BBC test card, which I did make a 3D version of, which was, I think, got a higher audience figure than some of our programs. But what we were looking for is alias information in the bottom 3 of the gratings, and we wanted to make sure that actually that would pass through and we wouldn't get any complaints. We have a quite vocal group of people who look at our pictures and tell us exactly what they think of us. So, next stage. Now this is my passion. This is what the standard setup looks like for the final of Wimbledon. Now, this is not for the everyday of Wimbledon, this is the final. So Centre Court for 2011 had 17 2D cameras, had one primary vision truck, which is a big vision truck. That's fed by several other vision trucks that do the alternate courts. Had one director, one main and reserve line back to Television Centre, fully diverse, and this gives you an idea of the scale of what we'd expect for the final. It also gives you the scale of what we'd expect for any major programme. Wimbledon is no different to the Olympics in that sense. One transmission path, 2 channels, 1 HD and 1 SD. Straightforward, very easy. This is what we had to do. We had our 17 2D cameras, we had to add 6 3D positions, so we had a total of 29 cameras on the court. That's a lot of cameras for a tennis court, which isn't probably much bigger than this hall. We had 2 primary vision trucks and 2 secondary trucks. We had obviously 2 directors because there were 2 completely different mixes, both vision and audio. We had 3 main and reserve links, so that's 6 lines coming out of that, a lot of bandwidth coming out, and that's at full resolution. And we had 2 transmission paths, completely separate transmission paths. So we were running across 3 different channels and the cinema. 4 channels in total, as I said, HD, 3D, SD and cinema coming out of that area. So, I'm going to give you 3 simple rules while we go through this. So every now and then I'm going to pop up the 3 simple rules, or it just won't happen. So looking at the future of 3D, what are the 3 simple rules that make it happen? This taught us one of the rules. No additional requirement for acquisition. Putting those extra cameras in, putting that extra truck in, putting those extra people in, just was pure money. It's something that makes it unsustainable. So, rule number 1, to make 3D sustainable, to make 3D happen, there's got to be no additional requirement for acquisition. On the day, there we are, side-by-side Olympics. I watched so much of this. I don't believe how much I watched of it. Anecdotes from around the day. 3D was added to the Olympics quite late. Panasonic being the main, one of the main sponsors of the Olympics, as you've probably seen from the screens and everything around the area. They're one of the main technology sponsors of the stadium and the technology in the stadium. We're very keen that it happens. They're very, very high proponents. Sony, Panasonic almost vie for the prestige of 3D. They really made it happen. But it was an add-on. And I did have to say, during the closing ceremony, which we won't talk about today, but during the closing ceremony, I could read the number, serial number, and camera number of every 2D Steadicam, because they got in the way of the 3D ones. In other words, they were piling in everywhere. The 3D guys, I did feel sorry for them. They definitely were an add-on to some of the Olympics coverage, and that did make it suffer. But I'm sure we can sort it out for future events. So, what was available? I think you have to remember now, with a lot of events, the BBC, even though it's in this country, is not the host broadcaster. We are the host broadcaster for Wimbledon. We were not the host broadcaster for the Olympics. Host broadcasting is now big business. The World Cup is HBS, Host Broadcasting Services, probably one of the first to go away from the local primary broadcaster. Formula One has its own in-house now, although it uses facilities locally. It actually is effectively all managed in-house. And the Olympics, the Beijing Olympics were the first where outside broadcast services actually ran it. They were totally running the 2012 Olympics. From now onwards, OBS will be the main provider for all broadcasts of the Olympics. 3D TV was therefore provided by OBS. We did not have the ability to put additional cameras in because it was added so late, unlike the 2D, where we have something called unilateral and multilateral. Multilateral is provided by the host broadcasting service. Unilateral is those extra cameras you put in. We were restricting the amount of 2D cameras we put in. There was no way we were going to get extra 3D cameras in there. So primarily the output for the BBC's 3D service would be OBS produced. And we didn't like that. We like to put a BBC flavour onto what we've got. it's not just adding the commentary, it's doing more to give it a BBC brand, to make it feel like a BBC programme and not just a supplied programme. You can go buy those off the shelf. So we had to think quite hard about what we were going to do. So how do you add BBC style? How do you add BBC to this alternate content? We decided that we'd have every day a presenter in vision, doing something, giving us an idea of what was going to go on. We'd have a short package attached to the daily highlights. We'd do something ourselves. We were just going to have 3 live events. We didn't have enough. The BBC had committed to showing every single event of the Olympics live. Everything was there on all our outputs. We didn't have enough channels, basically, to add a simulcast, because it would be something that was already being broadcast somewhere else of 3D. So we targeted 3 main events: the opening ceremony in its entirety, the closing ceremony in its entirety, and the men's 100-metre evening with a package around it. So we had a couple of hours worth of transmission there. All the rest we use from the OBS package service, and was a highlight of the day to make sure we've got the coverage of the events we needed. We had BBC commentators on every live event as well, so actually we used our alternate commentary service to deliver some of that. It was a simple 3D operation. We needed it to be simple. 3D was brand new, we were doing it live, we had to post-produce it, we had to deliver it. We had to train operators to do very quick pieces to camera, pieces to camera, and how to make those look good in 3D was very important. We trained editors to use 3D EVS devices. We had EVS there, we had one of them upgraded to 3D and to produce simple 3D packages. We had an opening to each event, so they would go out and shoot something, bring it back, post-produce it, and add the OBS supplied hour-long highlights programme to it. 3D presenters team for the men 100-metre finals. We'd have a trackside introduction where we could get a camera in for one event. We'd repeat the semi-finals, which we didn't show in 3D. They were shown in the highlights package very briefly, but we give some build-up. We take the main event and give some build-up to it. And we mix the OBS 3D feeds with the BBC packages. In other words, we would try and make something that looked like we were in control of most of the programme. To make it even better, as part of the whole process, we did send out, we got our science team to actually go and do some 3D shooting with a brand new camera at that point, remember, brand new camera, which was a series of iconic idents, top and tail each programme. These are available on the internet if you want to have a look at them. I think they were quite stunning. They used the BBC's composed theme. They were used to promote the Olympics on all channels in their 2D mode, and they were specially run on the 3D channel at every opportunity we had throughout the summer. And they were timeless, so that we can reuse them for any event we like. So have a look at one of them. So go and have a look in 3D yourselves, depending on what format you like and what player you've got. I'll leave it in side-by-side mode on this presentation for you. So that started and stopped each programme, and we had to make a few decisions then about how we were going to shoot this. We've done a lot of work with Sony on various equipment, and one of the things we had tried was the BMW 300, single unit, single body twin lens camera. We found out that this was very easy for some of our operators to use. It is based on the 500, which is, I would say, a workhorse news and low cost, but operated, not self-operated, camera, person-operated camera. It's easy to operate. It said it's MPEG 250 codec in each eye, which is good news. It's our standard codec for most programs now. It's fast to set up. In other words, once it was engineeringly set up, unless they dropped it, it stayed set up. It was just checked at the beginning of each day. It's a high quality, low noise camera, so you wouldn't have issues, as long as we put enough lighting on it, we wouldn't have issues with noise, screwing up the transmission encoding and making the pictures look poor. And it has it's well used. In other words, anybody that can operate a 500 camera, the BMW 500 camera, could pick this up, and provided they didn't touch anything other than start and stop and exposure and focus, they could produce some reasonable material from it. But we did have to train people how to set up 3D. We gave them a few people the camera, they went out and they brought back crap. So we had a training course with the Academy, BBC Academy, to run through some of the issues. What we wanted to do is to take camera operators to understand the pressures. If you're in a sport or news environment, you're given a location, you're given a small area, or you have to choose an area very quickly out of a few areas you can access. You've got to set up very quickly. You've got to know the teams. In other words, you don't have time to say hi and how are you. You've got to within the Olympics. You've also got to be accredited. We didn't have time to accredit new camera operators to get them in there. The security around that place is incredible, especially if you're working and would have access to all areas. The Academy was ready to train people. They're doing training courses for the industry, but they targeted this one for a special course. We needed to keep the team small, and we need the presenters, the directors, and the operators to all be able to work independently together, and to almost do each other's jobs. And we needed the sports editors to be able to do simple cuts, so they understand the speed, the turnaround time, and they weren't going to be precious about trying to adjust things that didn't quite work. They would reject that didn't work very rapidly, and the camera guys would then go and shoot again. So what did we have to teach them? What was important? Position. Where you stand relative to the sun, the background, and the environment is incredibly important. We have a nice horseshoe area between some of our buildings, and we sent them out there to shoot. There are trees, there are people walking around, there's Starbucks in there, there's a lot of activity in there. Very, very similar to how it would be in some of the open public areas of the Olympics. So go out there, get some shots, see what areas you need to rope off effectively, see how you need to place the camera. Look at the background. It's no good having an empty background. You lose all the 3D. There's nothing in there to see in 3D. What's the point of doing it in 3D? So use your trees, use your environment, use people, but make sure they don't start to annoy people watching in 3D. Look at the foreground. What you really don't want is things poking in the sides, because that upsets you. Edge violations generated by people doing the usual thing of hi mum behind the camera is not very good. Think about your edges, think about how the shots are lined up. Don't do what you normally do and frame something. Think about 3D, think about this dimension before you think about those dimensions. And the one thing I did learn, because it was an atrocious day when we did the first day of the training, absolutely atrocious. What's the first thing you do in rain if you've got a single camera and you're out with a presenter? Well, you give the presenter an umbrella, first of all. That's great. But then the guy or the PA or the director stands next to the cameraman with an umbrella, because they haven't got time to put the jacket on and make the camera waterproof, so they stand next to the camera with an umbrella, usually quite a large one. So you have to worry about headroom under an umbrella, and you have to worry about rain. Because what happens to rain on an umbrella? It falls off it. If the camera is here, the umbrella is here, and the lens is here, the rain falls here. About here. So we had a very good day shooting where they learned actually it's probably better to get the camera wet and put the umbrella further out and try and join the presenter's umbrella to the camera umbrella. Because rain between the camera lens and the presenter is the worst thing you can possibly imagine. And in the UK we have a very, very special sort of rain. It's big and it's annoying and you can see it. Snow and hail I haven't yet seen yet, but I'm sure guys working in more hostile environments will get used to snow about here eventually. Looks familiar. This is the setup we had for the Olympics. We simplified. That was the first thing we did, we simplified. The purple up there is the OBS feeds. They were coming in full surround sound, 1.5 uncompressed, 1.5 gigabit uncompressed. We had the BBC 2D feed, stereo and surround, so we had information, so we could take that from the 2D feed if we felt we need it. The 3D camera, which is our single camera we've had, and 3D commentary. It went into the central storage area and into the BBC's post area, where it was the EBS, where it was cut. We had a submix for 3D. So that was a small area where they would do a submix, taking the main 2D sound for background noise, because obviously that was sync, but adding the new commentary to it. S by S conversion, we moved on to Axon at that point, in racks. Much cooler. The links back to the BBC HD channel. So there you can see our entire infrastructure for 3D. Now, that was sitting on top of the 2D infrastructure, which would probably take the entire wall to draw. But we kept this one very, very simple. So, this came to rule 2. As you can see, we had to add that. That was the minimum we could add. These are some of the things, some of the organisations working around the movement of 3D. So the next one is no cost or time penalty for post-production or delivery. In other words, we want to send one version to home, and we want the set-top box, just like it sorts out surround sound to stereo, stereo to mono. We want the home receiver to make the 2D version for those that haven't got 3D TVs. Otherwise, we have to send 2 versions of the programme, we have to have 2 channels. Post-mortem, we've done it. Okay, we did one daily programme, we did an opening ceremony, we did a closing ceremony, we did the men's 100 metres. We had done it. You can't tell how relieved I was when the final credits went up on the closing ceremony, even though I couldn't read them. I was just relieved to have it done. So, opening ceremony, delivered the biggest 3D audience we ever had. 114,000 was the average, peaked at 160,000. Let's put that into context. The maximum audience figure for the Olympics was around, for the opening ceremony, was around 25 million. So that's not very many, is it? 114,000. Then we have to think about the number of TVs that were around. And actually, that does put it into context, and I'll come to that in a second. But it was only a 0.4% share of our audience. It peaked at 161,000, and we discovered that 52% of the population were aware that we were doing it in 3D. So quite a high awareness level. There were people that weren't aware we were doing the Olympics full stop, remember. So this is the awareness. 48% knew we were doing it, 13% knew that Sky were doing it, which they were also transmitting, and 48% didn't know we were doing 3D. Yeah, so okay, that's fair enough. Pulse is our main research area. 8% claimed to have 3D TVs, but only 33% of those watched it. So this is the context now. Only 8% of the viewers claim to have 3D TVs. Not very many. Owned a 3D TV, 8%, watched at home. So we hit quite a high percentage of that between the three of them. Watched in 2D, still half the audience with 3D sets watched in 2D. So that's another interesting fact. 3D is no longer a technical challenge. You know, after 3 years of doing this, 2 years of trial, 1 year of experimentation, it's not a technical challenge anymore. Our primary concerns have shifted. Audience continues to be small and fragmented. This is a worry. Opinion is split, and I've divided it into 4 groups. These are my own personal groups, not necessarily anybody recognised. There are the fanatics. Those that think everything should be in 3D, guts should be falling in your lap every 10 seconds, and if you have anything in positive parallax and then behind the screen, it's boring. They want everything here. We've got the critics, who vary from those that say it's a waste of time, money and expense, it'll never catch on, it's a gimmick, what's the point of it, through to actually being, why would you ever spend a penny on it, and we really think it's a waste of money. Those that can't see it, we know that there's a percentage of the population who have no 3D vision. What's the point? Yeah, it's like having no colour vision and watching colour telly. What's the point? So we know that. And those that try but just don't care, not interested. And just some numbers against those. About 1% of our audience were fanatics. They're the people that write to me saying, how dare you not produce every single program in 3D? I pay my license fee. You should be doing the whole lot, including the news in 3D. The critics, just as vocal in the opposite direction. How dare you waste a penny of the license fee money? I think it's a waste of money, time, and your existence. Can't watch it between 6 and 12%, and I think if you look at the population, that's about right. That would suggest that 6 to 12% have no 3D vision, therefore 3D television is pointless. The rest is the worry, just don't care. 90% roughly of our audience don't care. They'll watch a bit of it, then they'll turn back to 2D. My examples of that is I went to see Avatar. I just walked into the cinema with my daughter to go and see Avatar in 3D. I couldn't get in, I had to watch it in 2D. So I had to book to watch it in 3D. I went to see Harry Potter, the last film, and I had to watch it in 3D because I couldn't get into the 2D. And I was one of 5 people in the cinema. Now, that is not really a reflection of what happened in the cinema. It's a reflection of how people want to watch long films, actually. There were a lot of people watching The Hobbit in 3D, but I think they were going to see because of whatever it was and the hype about it. You tend to find the animations, the CG productions are well attended, but the real life, the lower budget, it's if it's cheaper, I'll watch it in 3D. If it's not, I'll watch it in 2D. This is the breakdown. This is the one I'm really worried about. Let's have a look. Sales not factored. Okay, Wimbledon. Around 10% of those with 3D televisions, around 10% of the audience watching it. Street dance, around 10% of those with 3D televisions. Strictly, around 10%. Olympics, around 10%. So it's not moving. We're getting, because more people have bought televisions, we think that is the new people. In other words, it suggests that as the numbers rise, it's the people who just bought it that are watching. We're not sustaining the original audience, in other words, it's not growing. The 100 metres final, 5%. You can't get a bigger event than a 100 metres final on the Olympics. It's probably bigger than the whole lot put together. Only 5% watched it. But look at some of those figures, and they are effectively dropping. In other words, they're not getting bigger, but the number of sets is growing. Probably about 3 million sets in the UK now, and we're probably in 5 to 10% maximum. The audiences don't show up on some of our figures, they're too small. So, conclusions. A good film, that, if anybody's not seen it. Will it go away this time round? 1920s, 1950s, 1980s, 2010. There's a pattern there, isn't there? For those of you who like numbers. It's about once every 30 years. I think that's because we've moved a generation. And it's not a generation in terms of people, because we're still around. I still remember the 80s, and I probably was alive in the 50s ones, but not only just. It's the producers. It's the people who make it. It's the young engineers. It's some of the guys at this university who've forgotten we've done it before and think it's great to do it again. Each time it's had a small innovation, but actually going back, the 50s was probably the heyday, better quality. We're only just beating it now. The 80s, we forget those big hairdos, those wide lapels, sideburns, and Jaws 3D. We just forget those ones. There is a difference this time, and the difference is worth considering. There are cheap displays. We have it in the home. It's not just a cinema event. There are consumer cameras. They don't cost very much more to make than standard cameras. There's gaming, which didn't exist in any of the other iterations. It's easy to access movies. We can just download them. Even iTunes has them in 3D now, so it's easy to download them. And there's very aggressive consumer marketing, which again didn't exist before. So we have something that has put some sustainability in it this time, in that it might just take it over. Instead of doing that, it might just carry it across to the next iteration. Maybe not 30 years this time, because there may be some things that do change that. But this time it may not collapse to zero and have to start again. It may just sort of coast gradually towards zero, with the cinema pushing it every now and again, and the marketing pushing every now and again. But, for those that went to CES, we had some very confusing news. It was described as what were the biggest tombstone for 3D. all we saw, those that didn't go to CES and NAB, was this sort of headline. It's dead, it's gone, don't worry about it, there's plenty of other things out there. For those that did go, it was slightly different. It was business as usual. Why didn't you see the headlines of 3D? It was like HD. You walk around any trade show now, do you see a banner saying HD? If you haven't got HD, you're not there. So 3D was there. It was well represented to people who went. It was business as usual. Auto stereo was the buzz. Lots of people showing that, and 3D enabling technologies were around. There was other things that allowed 3D to happen were the key ones. If I go to IBC, I spend a day walking around the edge of every hall, because that's where you see the enabling technologies and those small booths with those small individual producers producing small devices that help the larger stands sell their goods and products. And actually something really was confusing. So this year we had another version of 3D at most of the trade shows. So it was print your cameras, print your performance and print your production fee, because that's about all it's worth at the moment. We'll see where that takes us in the future. So 3 simple rules. Rule number 3, how will we make sustainable 3D? We get rid of the glasses. So no additional requirements for acquisition. I can walk out there with a camera and I can shoot 3D without doing anything else other than I would to do 2D. No cost or time penalty when I get it back to base and I want to transmit it, and no glasses in the home will make sustainable 3D. How close are we to that? Because that's the important one, and what will do it. Looking at cameras, they're too large, too complex still. It's too slow to rig, that's put together. It's too big and bulky. They're very expensive to get matching lenses. That's the critical thing now. You can get matching cameras quite easily. Any engineer worth their money can make 2 cameras match each other exactly now. You put 2 lenses on, you completely ruin that. The skill base is growing, but it's expensive for TV still. It still costs too much for TV. There's a desire to make movies. Is this still a problem? You give someone a big camera, they want to go and make a movie on a TV budget, they will fail. Usually editorially, and not technically. They'll make something quite stunning that no one will watch. 3D for TV is better but not fully understood. In other words, we are not the movies. Don't try and make a movie, try and make a television program. So what I want, and any engineers in here, anybody that's studying vision technology, lens technology, this is what I want. That's a 3D camera. It's a concept camera from Sony. It's got 1 lens. It's a real 3D camera. Simple to operate, rugged, electronically set up, otherwise I don't have to worry about it once it's set up. Has a depth analysis within the viewfinder, and selectable for deliverable. In other words, I can select my screen size. Am I targeting TV? Am I targeting large screen displays? Am I targeting 84 inches? Am I targeting 50 inches? That's a 3D camera. And some of that is available now, but not enough. So, to finish off with, how do we get sustainable 3D? How do we take it from where we were at the Olympics to where we'd like it to be, maybe this time next Olympics? There are some enabling technologies, as I said before. This is taking off extremely fast. But if you look at the displays, how many of them auto stereo? I've seen probably 3 or 4 big manufacturers who have got 3D auto stereo 4K displays now. And I think this is really important. It is beginning to be, in other words, an evolving technology will improve the experience of 3D. It allows us to get it through the same pipe. We can do HD 3D quite easily through a 4K pipe. Full resolution each eye, get rid of most of the problems we've had about having to halve the resolution or having to cheat. Much higher frame rates on the televisions, allowing us to do much better flicker-free images. For those of you who saw The Hobbit, how many of you saw it in a standard 96 frames a second projector, or one of the much higher frames per second projectors? Because those who saw it in the standard projectors had a very poor experience, because 48 frames a second with a 96 frame projector doesn't give you a good flashing ratio. In other words, I had a problem with it for a while. Chris Johns, who's my opposite in Sky, saw it in one of the new Sony projectors, which is, I think, double that speed, and actually said it was a very good experience. So I saw it again in 24 frame and I had a much better experience watching it in 3D. So something to be very, very careful about is the display technology can damage the whole experience. But there is another option, and I always like to finish with this option. Option 2, final thought. If we do nothing, if nothing changes, if nothing goes any further, in other words, the displays don't get better, the cameras don't get better, the post-production doesn't get easier, it will go away again. So be prepared for 3D 2014. Thank you very much. Do you want to do questions or anything? Yes. I'm happy to do any questions. I'm going to be around for some of the day. I have to go back to London after lunch, but I'll be back for some of the day. So come and find me. If we've got any questions now for a couple of minutes, then I'm happy. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, the problem that I've heard about with doing the sustainability aspect is the idea that you can do a 2D and a 3D production simultaneously in the same show. And the producers I've talked to said that's just impossible. You change your camera movement and all that.
We haven't tried a live one yet. We've tried a non-live and a single camera production, and it produced boring 3D. It also produced compromised 2D. So when you sit in the middle, and you can, it depends on your subject. We're doing it with Doctor Who, and it's given us a very different experience because the 3D, the Doctor Who lends itself to 3D. So we have some programs. We have a program called Legal Gentleman, something like the film, and there's a dark comedy on BBC that's based on some of the same characters, where it uses grotesque close-up, big wide-angle lens close-ups, where actually the 2D and the 3D complement. In other words, 3D just adds to 2D. So it's script-oriented as well as camera movement-oriented. You can change the multi-camera environment. I think you will compromise too much, unless you're doing something where you have the cameras on stage, like a rock concert where you just add to it. But the wide shots won't work. So you may have same cameras but different additional cameras for 2D. I think the key thing there is do you need additional wide shots that don't work in 3D to supplement the 2D? And that's jury's still out. But that's one of my questions. No compromising, no additional requirements for acquisition. And some of that is going to be about how agile the cameras are. Can we chuck more 3D cameras in, because we're limited at the moment with the cost? Can we chuck, say, 50 3D cameras into an environment where we would have had 20 2D cameras? And get a much better 2D and 3D experience to be decided.
Right now, I guess I would characterize your work in 3D as experimental and with regard to audience acceptance and all that. What kind of numbers do you see, penetration rates do you need to call it sustainable? Worthwhile?
Well, we're lucky in a way. We don't have to run the same business model as, say, a subscription company. We have to look at a technology based on its viability as well as the audience demand for it. With HD, there was a long gestation period. It existed in many places before we transmitted it, and we were making programs in HD before we, for sale before we transmitted them. So there began to be a head of steam, if you like, behind a public demand for it, even though there was an expense to doing it. The enabling technology for the consumer was the flat screen. The flat screen prices dropping to the supermarket levels, which meant that our pictures in SD started to look poor on those big screens. So it was a double driver. We wanted to maintain our quality to the standard we had on 21-inch tubes up to 40-inch flat screens. So it hits quite low on those numbers. But for a technology like 3D, it's a large cost to us. There's an additional requirement for consumer, i.e. stick glasses on. So it tends to be they don't watch it all the time. So not like HD, we turn the set on, I want every program to be in HD. You wouldn't want that in 3D. So I think the numbers to be sustainable probably have to be 10 times those of HD. So in other words, a lot bigger than they are now.
Yeah, the move from SD to HD was quite different in that you knew that your entire target audience was going to move from
Yes, exactly. And something, the technology of the displays had moved our goalposts as well as their goalposts. So it was, we both had, the consumer and the broadcaster had a change to make. With 3D, you don't watch it all the time. Even if you could watch it all the time, you wouldn't put the glasses on all the time. You know, either you haven't got enough for the whole family, or you really don't want to sit there watching with glasses on. Auto stereo might change that, because you get it regardless. And we don't see enough people with 3D tellies turning that 2D to 3D conversion button to say people are going to do this whether we want it or not. And that was the driver with HD. People complaining about the quality because they had HD sets and not we weren't sending it. 3D, we expect to see large numbers pressing the 2D conversion button. We're not, because they don't want to put the glasses on. So yeah.
You're talking about producing content for certain presentation modes and so on. Is there any possibility for you to over-provision and to produce for the best kind of presentation mode and then adapting it or downsampling or later on?
I think that's something that maybe Graham and John will talk about later a bit about. I don't know if you're going into some of that detail, but unlike HD, where you're giving the best quality on the lower performance, down converting HD to SD gives you better SD. Taking a movie produced 3D gives you a very unsatisfactory television produced. Taking television produced 3D onto a movie gives you very unsatisfactory movie produced. So it's too big, actually it gives you very unsatisfactory, it actually causes you problems. So if you think about the disparity we have on a small screen, it's a lot bigger than it will be for a large screen presentation. So you've got the television disparity on the large screen, you're suddenly getting your eyes going this way and that way, whereas when you produce it for the movies and on television, they're just doing a little bit of that. So we have a fundamental physical problem. Humans have to change a bit. If we can move our eyes further and further apart, we might be able to do that. So I think there's a logistics problem with that one as well that we need to sort out. So I think you have to target your production to the screen sizes. Now, hoping that we have a wide enough range that we hit. Probably don't have to worry about 3D on sets below 30 inches because they'll be too small. But say 36, 38 to 80, I'm hoping we can hit that range. If we can't, we have to develop it for 50 to 80 or 60 to 80 and 40 to 50, we have another problem.
What about a mobile audience? Do you think we'll ever be a 3D mobile audience?
Google Glass might do it. In that case, we can throw away all the rules and start again. But for pads, I think it's an interesting experiment. It gives you some sort of depth perception. And maybe the way it goes in the future, iPlayer can certainly deliver to that. We'll see. I think that's something I can't talk about yet, but I think it might be interesting in the future. But I think the Google Glass option might be even more interesting. Let's see if we can get people to walk under trains because they're not concentrating watching 3D as opposed to 2D. There's a great advert. Have you seen the latest Google Glass advert with the guy in the toilet and urinals going like that and then getting pushed by this guy because he's got the camera on?
What about the issue of all the stereoscopic displays and having to switch between normal 2D display and 3D display?
I personally think that
or do you need a second TV?
I think if you have an auto stereo display and it's a good display, I'm not going to say any are bad or good now, but it's a good display, you'll be hitting the conversion button. So you'll watch everything in 3D, whether your TV made it. And I've had some problems with these conversion buttons because they're getting rather good. They're not producing, as long as they keep positive and don't push stuff into the negative, they're actually producing quite good depth. They're not really 3D, they're producing quite good depth. And if you have depth on everything, you'll watch it. It's when you start pulling things forward at the screen that you start to do it much more carefully. So I think very good auto stereo that does very, very good 3D, true 3D, will just stay in 3D mode continuously. It's like those people who have upmix stereo to surround. It'll just stay there all the time because they like it. If you don't like it, you'll switch to 2D mode and watch everything in 2D. But at least you have the choice with auto stereo display of doing it in a very much more viewer-orientated way as opposed to converting it to 3D, making sure you're in the right mode, side by side, top, bottom, whatever it is, putting your glasses on, sitting there, and then putting your drink up. And because I don't wear glasses, how many times have I swapped my drink because I've got something other glasses on? And I'm not used to them. And my wife does wear glasses and hates wearing two pairs. So yeah, you can't win, can you? Anyway, I think you've got a break now.
Thank you very much.